This video is brought to you by Straight Goods News, Canada's alternative online news source. Visit straightgoods.ca.
Economy and a lack of action around job creation. They presented a budget that failed to take any concrete steps towards creating jobs. And now they're introducing EI rules that further restrict who can get access to EI. They presented ever-changing stories about these changes with different ministers letting out sometimes very contradictory information. We heard Minister Finley just recently on May 15th saying, we haven't announced the details yet. We want to make sure the legislation gets through first, but it'll be suitable or appropriate to the individual's qualifications and within their geographic area. She also said regulations have to be developed after legislation is passed. And then we heard another Conservative minister, Ashfield, say people will no longer be able to turn down job opportunities within an hour's drive if they expect to collect benefits. It's not to force people to go to Alberta, not to force people, to drive for 4 hours or move away from their home community. That's not the intent. And then later on, he said, yet Conservative officials later said the minister was speaking in generalities in an effort to make the point that EI recipients will not be expected to move. Let's remember with EI that only 40% of unemployed Canadians, less than 40% of unemployed Canadians, get access to EI benefits. That number is about 28% here in the province of Ontario. And in Canada, we have 6 unemployed workers for every job that's available. Unemployment insurance is insurance owned by the people that have paid into it. That's working people and employers, not the Conservative Party of Canada. As we saw briefly yesterday before the Prime Minister's office got a hold of him, even Conservative MPs have concerns about this Trojan horse budget bill with its many hidden surprises. We keep discovering new things. The minister is grabbing new powers through this bill to arbitrarily restrict EI further. She's announced some things today, but stay tuned. It could all change again in 6 months. She has the power to do that. What we heard today is the minister scapegoating unemployed Canadians, that they're not trying hard enough to find work. This is the same minister who has called EI lucrative. And now when it comes to changes, she's saying, just trust me. Well, Canadians don't trust Conservatives. Une éducatrice en garderie de Salaberry de Valleyfield devrait accepter de travailler dans l'entrepôt de distribution de Shoppers Drug Mart de Cornwall, Ontario. An electrician from Sackville, New Brunswick would have to apply to be the aquatic program manager for the city of Truro, Nova Scotia. Is that what we're going to see? The provinces are also raising serious concerns about these changes. They're concerned about this minister's decision not to consult with them before making changes. And to top it off, the Conservatives are trying to turn off the tap when it comes to the release of key information about unemployment. The Conservatives are again trying to starve the government of data, just as we saw with their elimination of the long-form census. With that, I'll just open it up for questions. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll start off with Julie Van Dusen of CBC.
The way that Diane Finley described it is that she wants to match skills with openings. So what could be so wrong with that?
Well, under the law currently, people are required to look for work in order to get benefits. That is the law. And the fact that less than 40% of Canadians actually get benefits, it would seem that they're probably applying the law to match people with their skills. There's no legislative change needed to do what the minister's describing.
But what's the boogeyman in this legislation as you see it? Because it's very, the changes here are very complicated and affect a lot of segments of the workforce. What's the overriding theme here? What is it you're most concerned about?
This Trojan horse budget bill, which this piece has nothing to do with the budget. What this bill does is it gives the power to the minister to make subsequent changes. There is a definition today of suitable employment in the Unemployment Insurance Act. But this bill would give the minister the power to say this today, but then in 6 months have something completely different as to what constitutes suitable employment. She's saying, just trust us. And I don't think Canadians trust this government because there has been a lack of transparency and accountability. And we've seen it far too many times. There is so much hidden in this budget bill that we keep discovering and has nothing to do with the budget. And I think that piece of it is very troubling. We should open it up and let's have discussions with the people who will be directly affected by these changes. I think they should be involved.
Shirley Engel of Global National.
The officials in the department said that less than 1% of EI claimants will be cut off. So given that, whatever that number is, 5,000 or whatever, what's wrong with this and what would the NDP propose in terms of EI changes? Because there are a lot of people that say EI changes are needed, that there are abuses of the system. And if we're only really talking about 1%, what's wrong with making it tougher for them to collect EI?
Let me tell you what's an abuse of the system. An insurance plan that everyone's obliged to pay into, and in Ontario, for example, only 28% of unemployed people can get access to it. That seems to me pretty abusive. And under what we hear from the minister today, she talks about seasonal work, but let's remember there are a growing number of Canadians who also do contract work, who work on contracts, who have their work is more precarious than it used to be. And these people, I presume, will also be affected by these changes. So I think the real problem is people are paying into an insurance plan for which they're not getting benefits.
But what would the NDP propose as an alternative? Because under this plan, the minister says, look, EI is only 55% of your salary anyway, and we're not asking anyone to accept a job that's less than 70% of their previous salary. So they'd be better off taking the job than they would be staying on EI.
I don't think people are stupid. I think most people, if they have a job that is in their field, in their skill set, and it makes them better off financially, and they can take that job, they will do it. And I think it's the implication is that people are lazy and don't want to work. And I think that's a very unfair message for this minister to be sending. Why aren't we talking about the $13 billion this year in corporate tax cuts without strings to create jobs? Why aren't we putting a little pressure on employers to create more jobs in Canada so that we can reduce the unemployment level?
So what would the NDP propose if anything, to change the EI system? Do you have any ideas on that, or are you just happy with the system the way it is?
No, obviously I've just described a number of problems with it. I think that we need to recognize the changing nature of work and recognize that work is more precarious. People do work on contract, seasonal, part-time work, and recognize the difficulties that people have if they are unemployed in getting access to EI benefits.
What about Louise Elliott of CBC?
Peggy, just in terms of the minister and the department saying that they're not really adding a whole lot of extra resources to administer or enforce this new set of rules, do you think that's realistic? I mean, we've seen lots of stories about people having very much trouble getting access to EI because of backlogs at Service Canada. What's your understanding? What is your assessment of this situation vis-a-vis added resources?
Well, part of the big problem today for unemployed workers is that they never get to talk to a person. They can be a couple of hours on hold, playing telephone message hell, and they don't get to talk to a person, and that's why there are so many appeals. Claims are denied, people appeal it, and so many people are actually awarded their benefits on appeal because if they could have just spoken to a person, then it would have been, people would have realized their claim was legitimate. They would have solved the problem. So cutting back even further over the next 3 years, there will be about 29,000 more jobs lost in the public sector. How many of these services will be cut back even further?
I'll go to Jason Fiquette of Postmedia.
Thanks, Peggy. Just a question. Louise just kind of asked a bit of what I was curious about. The other thing was, you keep on mentioning like less than 40% of Canadians are actually getting benefits. What is that based on? And are you suggesting then that it's too stringent number of hours that are needed to qualify for EI? Like, just want to put some context around what you're saying, because the government doesn't seem to suggest that less than 40% of people are getting EI benefits. So where do you get that from, and how do you change it?
Yeah, it's StatsCan numbers, which some numbers we're still able to get from StatsCan, and it's based on the unemployment statistics, the official unemployment statistics, and the number of EI claims that are accepted. And part of the problem that you have identified is the hours system, which varies from province to province and region to region, and it doesn't capture the changing nature of work, where many people are on contract or their hours are irregular, and so that also causes many people to fall through the cracks.
We'll go to Roger Smith of CTV.
Ms. Nash, for years we've heard complaints about welfare bums and people on Pogey spending the winter skiing at Whistler. How much of this do you think is ideological? And what is the target?
What I hear from this government is a message to demonize people who, through no fault of their own, are unemployed. And I think the announcement today is an attempt at damage control, because the communications, the spin cycle has kind of has gone off the rails, and they're trying to reassure people that what they're proposing is very reasonable. If it's so reasonable, separate this part of their Trojan horse budget bill, put it into the Human Resources and Skills Development Committee. Let's have a good examination of this. Let's hear from the people who not only pay into the fund, but will be directly affected by these changes, to make sure that these are the changes that Canadians need and will help connect Canadians with jobs.
The officials said that they expected maybe 1% of people would cut off benefits, but obviously the government is also saving money. If people are forced to work, then they're not paying them as much in EI, or not as much as going out in EI. Given that this whole budget is about cutting costs and the deficit, what do you make of the inability of the government to come up with a figure, even a ballpark figure, of what these measures might save?
Well, as you know, it's been very difficult for us to get figures. We were pushing hard on the changes to OAS and finally got a figure on a Friday afternoon before a long weekend. So we don't know. But again, let's be clear that that this is a fund that working people and employers pay into. And yes, of course, they want it to be well run, and they want it to be used for the intended purpose. But I think what's happening here is that people are being scapegoated, that if they can't find a job at a period of elevated unemployment, somehow it's entirely their fault. I don't see anything in this Budget Implementation Act that would help people with retraining, to help them develop new skills, help them have a step up in a changing economy. And I don't see anything that reaches the employers who've gotten incredible tax breaks, billions of dollars in tax breaks, to say to them, okay, folks, you're sitting on $500 billion of cash here. Let's create some jobs and get the economy going.
Just go ahead.
Bruce Campion, the Toronto Star. Ms. Nash, just wondering what you think of the the effort by Ms. Finley now to tie the temporary foreign workers program to the employment changes, and what would be the ramifications for unemployed Canadians on that?
Well, just remember the changes, again, that are buried in this Trojan horse bill, which is that instead of having, I think it's 3 months currently, to see if there are Canadians available for jobs before bringing in temporary foreign workers. It's a longer period. That's going to be reduced to 2 weeks, and temporary foreign workers can now be paid 15% less than the going wage. So that will already exert downward pressure on wages. What I glean from the minister's comments today is that the EI changes will also exert downward pressure on people's wages. We'll just have to see what she actually means, but I think there will be downward pressure on people's wages at a time when costs are rising and inequality is rising. I don't think that's healthy for our economy.
Do you think Canadians, unemployed Canadians, could be forced into jobs that perhaps they might not otherwise accept? And I guess should they, is that a time when they should be allowed to be choosy about their work?
Well, I'm not sure we have clarity today on exactly what the minister is proposing. So I think if for people who are actively looking for work, and I was in Montreal last night and heard some very poignant testimony from young people who, of course, have double the unemployment rate of other Canadians, people who were in a lot of distress because they were unsuccessful in finding work. So what is the message to them? I think there's still confusion, but apprehension as well.
You kind of touched on this earlier, but for weeks we've been speculating, and there's been speculation about what is this suitable employment. I'm wondering, the government and officials told us today we're providing clarity on what is a reasonable job search and what is suitable employment. In your opinion, has that clarity been provided?
I don't think so, because again, in the existing legislation, there is a definition of suitable employment that was adopted by Parliament, and it's very clear, and it changes over time. If you can't find a job in your direct field, then the search broadens. I think what is most troubling is that the changes that will be made now fall under the exclusive power of the minister. They don't have to come back to Parliament. Clearly, she's not going to have a public debate on this, and it's buried in this Trojan horse bill, along with so many other changes. I think that's really the big problem.
And one last point, the minister didn't really get a chance to elaborate on this, but in terms of the appeals process, we were hearing that, there are different recourses for if you have complaints about EI, OAS, that kind of thing. Those are being collapsed into a single tribunal. I'm wondering, since we're not hearing of any other resources being added to deal with an influx of information from EI claimants, are you concerned about Canadians who want to appeal and being, delayed or otherwise not being given the opportunity to do so?
That's another change, as you say, that hasn't gotten enough attention. And, the website, the government's own website, encourages people to go and appear in person for their appeals. And for many unemployed people, because they're not able to speak to a human being in person when they make their claim, they're often denied claims that they win on appeal because they are actually able to speak to a real person. So there is concern that there may be less expertise, that there may be less accessibility with this new system. It certainly seems that there's going to be fewer resources devoted to it. But again, we don't have a lot of details because it is one tiny piece buried in this massive bill.